let's review where we left off, the basic storyline from which we move forward. And welcome everybody. And this is Rabbi Dov Fischer of Young Israel of Orange County. If you're catching this on YouTube, please give us a like if you like it, and please subscribe to the channel. Even forward the link to other people if you so think it's worth their while. Okay, David and Bathsheba. What we learned in great detail, so I'm just giving you the quick overview, is that Bat Sheva was married to Uriah Hachiti, the Hittite. He wasn't literally a Hittite, either he had converted to Judaism or he's called that because he lived among Hittites. One day, the army was away at war, and they were fighting the people of Ammon, the Ammonites. David did not go out to battle along with everyone else. Normally, the king goes out to battle and leads the battle together with his chief of staff, in this case, Yoav ben Tzruya, Yoav. But David chose not to go to battle. He had just been at a previous battle against many other nations, securing the land for his future son to be able to build a Beit HaMikdash and rule in peace. And after several battles that he had led, he chose to sit this one out because he was sure that his chief of staff and his men could fight without him. He was in his palace, basically in his bedroom, and he kind of had nothing to do. He was just relaxing, and we remind ourselves it was a time before television and email and computers and newspapers, and he had nothing to do. He was just whiling away the time because he had a beautiful palace with a beautiful bedroom. It overlooked a lovely terrace, have a view of the city of Jerusalem. What could be more beautiful than that? And so he went and looked out on the porch, on his veranda, and he saw across the way a magnificently beautiful woman emerging from a small pool, essentially, on her own porch. That pool was a mikveh. She had her time of month that she could go to the mikveh. So she was emerging from that. We talked about that she was in an area that was secluded from being viewed by others. And we learned in the Gemara that there's a reason that essentially that which was obstructing the view of her got knocked out of the way. We learned that David had kind of challenged God on an earlier occasion. Why do the people pray to Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, or invoke the names of Abraham, Yitzchak? They don't pray to Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, but they invoke the names of Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov when we say the Shemona Esrei. Baruch Hashem Elokeinu v'Elokei Avotenu, Elokei Avraham, Elokei Yitzchak, v'Elokei Yaakov. So David said, why are they in the future not going to invoke me also? After all, I'm the progenitor by your decision, God, of Messiah. And God said, because they were tested and they passed the test. David said, so test me. And so God tested him. The seclusion was sent away, and he could see Bat Sheva. And that was his test. He sees her across the way. He might have her in his mind, but he becomes overwhelmed by the need to have her. He learns that, well, all the men who go to war at that time, it was mandatory within the halachic Jewish law of the armed forces of the day that all men gave a Gett, a bill of divorce to their wives before going off to war, in case they would die, not be able to be found, and we're living through it right now. What Hamas has done, we don't even know who's alive, who's dead. As far as those who are dead, we don't know where they are. Frankly, they don't know where they are half the time. We have so much to cover and so much important learning here. I don't want to get too far off with the current news about what's going on with debates over whether to make a deal with Hamas and everything. But the fact that Hamas can't even give a list of who's alive, they don't know. They have no idea. They took hostages. They sold hostages to other people. They threw them in tunnels. So it's the same thing in the times of David. People would go to war, and God forbid someone would die, and they wouldn't even know where he is. Maybe there'd be a fire, and it would set fire to his body. They didn't have DNA in those days. So everybody had to give a get when they went to war. If God forbid they die, or we're not sure whether they died, so their wives should not be chained, agunot, unable to marry again. Can't marry a second man if your husband's alive, even if he's hostage or in captivity, and if you don't know whether he's alive or dead. So maybe he's alive, you can't remarry. And maybe that goes on for what they're going to hold him for 20 years. Well, look with the Arabs. They'll hold people. There are people that they're not talking about in the news, like Hadar Golden. The Arabs got their hands on him like 10 years ago in a previous war, and they haven't given him back his body or that of his colleague who they killed both of them. Arabs will hold him for 20 years, 30. Look at Eli Cohen in Syria. They haven't given him back for 67, 30. They haven't given him back for 57 years. So the Ammonites might take someone, not tell you whether he's alive or dead. The wife's stuck. Consequently, everyone had to divorce the wife. With the understanding after the war, you come back and you remarry. It's a quick procedure. You don't have to have a whole big fancy marriage. It can be done in 5 minutes. So, and it's understood. Well, what if somebody else in the meantime, who's not at war, goes and tries to take one of these women? Well, it's just not done. It's a national, the public won't allow it. Halachically, it could happen, but they won't allow it because everybody's husbands are giving them divorces, and it's an institution, and so forth. So we know she's divorced because her husband Uriah is at war. David knows this. Now, if David wants to grab her and have intimacy with her, you're not allowed to be physically intimate with a woman who's menstruated. Even if it's a year since she menstruated, or 30 years, until she goes into the mikveh, you're not allowed to be physically intimate with her. Some people don't realize that. Let's say a woman at age 40 or 50 becomes Orthodox and is getting married and doesn't realize she's still in a state of impurity till she goes to the mikveh, if she's never gone to a mikveh. A 60-year-old woman, let's say, who's past her menopause, so she no longer has a period, menstruation. Now she becomes Orthodox and she gets married. So she assumes, well, I don't have periods anymore. So I don't have to go to a mikveh. I haven't had a period for 5 years, 10 years. So the halacha is, if she's never gone to a mikveh, well, during the years from the time she started menstruating until age 60 when she married, she's been in a status of tumah. It doesn't make her any less a quality human being and all that. But in terms of physical intimacy with her new husband, she's got to go to a mikveh at least once to create that purification from all the previous tumah of the past. It only takes one. It's not like you have to count how many months, whether in my life before that time, do I have to go into mikveh for each one? No. One cleans it all. To use the word clean, one purifies it all. Okay. So in those days, physical intimacy was a different thing from today. The act might be the same, but the psychology of it within the halachic Jewish community was different. You were allowed to have more than one wife, right? Polygamy. And in the same context, we saw many, many times Avraham Avinu, he couldn't have a baby with Sarah. So Sarah said, take my handmaiden. It wasn't a thing where it's being hidden from the wife. And no, Sarah said, have a baby with her. Well, today people wouldn't do that because there's a different connotation with physical intimacy and a man with a woman and all of that. But in those days, the psychology, the culture was different. In the same way with Yaakov, when Rachel could not give birth. So she said, take Bilhah, my handmaiden. Then when Leah saw that he's taking Bilhah and having two kids, Dan and Naphtali, so Leah said, take Zilpah, my handmaiden. And he had Gad and Asher. And that's how it worked. And there were Pilegshot. A Pilegesh is a concubine. And a concubine was a man could be with a woman intimately, physically intimately, and it was just like a wife, only no, she did not receive a marriage. She was an unmarried wife, so he could get rid of her at any time without paying alimony. That's the society. So back to our situation, Bat Sheva divorced. As it happens, he knows for a fact she just came out of a mikveh. And we talked about the idea of mikvahot on rooftops or on porches. We talked about that, so we'll go into it now. So he knows she went out of a mikveh, so she's permitted. But although she's not married, culturally you don't take an army soldier who divorced his wife. You don't take advantage of that. But David decides, I'm the king. Technically, under the law, I'm allowed to take her and be intimate with her. Technically, under the law. If I do it privately, secretly, the country doesn't have to know. There's no investigative reporters and nobody with phones, with smartphones, taking photographs and catching people. So David sends one of his trusted servants to bring her over to the palace, and he has an intimate act with her and sends her home. And he's already got like 6 to 8 wives, and we don't even know how many concubines he already has. And he does this. And we've answered lots of questions about it. We're just going through now, refreshing memories. So he's done a really bad thing, even worse than really bad, horrible, but legal. It's very important. It was legal. Okay. Uriah comes back from the front, or David, Bat Sheva passes the word, I'm pregnant. She finds out like a month later, whatever it is, she determines a month later she's pregnant. That wasn't supposed to happen. That wasn't the idea. So David tries to figure, now what am I going to do? I can't have her get pregnant. Her husband's been away at battle. People are going to ask who got her pregnant. It's going to come back to me, maybe. The whole idea is this is secret. I don't want people thinking that I'm sitting here as the king taking advantage of the fact that my soldiers had to divorce their wives, especially this particularly beautiful wife, a woman. So David comes up with a strategy. He says, I want the husband, Uriah, to be brought back from the front, and I want to send him immediately to go sleep with his wife. So Uriah comes back, sleep with the wife. We'll find out she won't tell him she's pregnant. A month later, she'll tell him she's pregnant. She'll have a baby. People are not going to be counting 8 months, 9 months. And it'll be assumed Uriah got her pregnant, and everything's good. So Uriah comes, David says, go sleep with your wife, which itself is curious. He says, go home, take a break. That makes sense. For some reason, he's being given a hiatus, and go sleep with your wife. That's kind of, Uriah, even more surprisingly, says to David, I'm not going to. I'm not going into my house. I'm sleeping outdoors on the street. What? Well, my soldiers, my band of brothers are at the front or at war. I can't leave them behind. It's that kind of, today they've been questioning Pete Hegseth. I read his book. It's that kind of band of brothers thing, that your brothers in the battle, you become a family unto itself. While you're fighting in Iraq, as Pete Hegseth was, I'm not getting into the politics of it, but he writes in his book that that's his family, and they would give their lives for each other, and they're all together. So, So Hegseth was writing that, and that's Uriah Hachiti. This is not a time for me to start making jolly with my wife. My brothers are at war. If for your royal reason you want me here right now, I'll sleep on the street. David tries to get him to go into the house. David sends food in a banquet. Go be with your wife. have this beautiful banquet, sleep with her. And Uriah won't. And in explaining why, he becomes very fresh, arrogant, and brazen in talking to the king, conveying basically that I don't have a lot of respect for you, buddy. My boss, my king, my authority is Yoav ben Tzruya, the commander-in-chief of the army. Well, now we're in a whole new, now we've got a whole new situation. This all starts because he takes this lady for that one time, for that one night stand or one day stand. Now he's got a rebel. And we've learned according to Rambam that a king can execute a person, can order that a person be executed if the person is a Morred b'malchut, a rebel against the king. And Uriah unnecessarily goes right in the king's face and says that. So the king orders him executed. King wants him executed. Forget about Bat Sheva. She's not part of this part of it anymore. The guy just walked into a situation where Uriah has to be executed if the king wants. Rambam says the king has the authority, no trial, no witnesses, no nothing. The king can order anybody to be executed. A decent king does not do that. Uriah crossed a red line. Okay. So David wants to execute him. And now David thinks about it. He's going to be executed. Now she's really a divorcee. Not only on paper, but her husband, she's a widow. Now I could take her. I could have her. No secret. Bring her over. I have enough bedrooms in this palace. And then he realizes what's it going to look like. It is thoroughly legitimate, according to halakha, to have Uriah killed. Just as it was thoroughly legitimate, according to halakha, to have slept with Bat Sheva. But it won't, the idea of the Bat Sheva one was no one's going to know. Once he kills Uriah, now that's public news. The king just had someone executed. And then a month later, Mazel Tov, he's getting married to her. Everybody's going to start talking. People are not going to sit and learn, come to Rabbi Fischer's class and learn that it was all halachically permitted. It's going to look like the king had a guy killed so he could have his wife. So the king decides, I'm going to have him killed in a different way, because he is chayav mita. He does have to be executed for being a rebel against the monarchy. But I'm going to do it in a way that people won't realize that I'm going to send a note I'm going to send him back to the army. I'm going to send a note to the commander-in-chief Yoav. I want you to put him up in the front line in a space where he's almost surely going to get killed in battle. And so put him up in the front. So Yoav does. And indeed, Uriah gets killed. They're attacking the gates, the wall of Ammon, and someone maybe shoots an arrow down from the top, whatever. That's like a deadly thing. When you're in the front line trying to get through, I'm thinking like the movie Glory. If you remember that movie about African Americans who fought in the Civil War in their own unit, and without getting into that story, the bottom line was they led the charge up the fort, and everyone knew it was dead. It was like a death sentence. The guys who go first are going to get killed. I think it was for Fort Wagner. I may be wrong, and they're going to get killed, but they're going to perhaps they will pierce the fort, and then other units will be behind them and maybe take the fort. So here Uriah gets killed. Uriah, now the word gets back to David. Uriah was killed in battle. The public has no suspicions of anything. Poor guy got killed. He left a widow. David wants to marry his widow. They live a block apart. They live within view of each other. I mean, they know each other, perhaps. Makes sense. But he's sparing her a life of being unmarried. And happily ever after, end of story, chapter next. No. God comes in. And God comes in through the prophet Nathan. And this is where we start getting into it. And God speaks to him, and then God sends Nathan, to tell him what he has done under the letter of the law was legal, but it is the worst of sins. He's done something so horrible and terrible in taking this man's wife, and in consequently having this man killed, having brought this man to a situation where his personal, quiet contempt for the king became was given voice, which maybe he would not have done had he not been pulled from the battlefield, if he already disrespected the king. And this is an if, I don't know. If his contempt for the king partly was because the king did not come to battle. You know how the secular Israelis and the religious Zionists in Israel have a contempt for Haredim because they won't go to battle. I don't want to get into those politics. I'm just saying that there is a clear contempt among secular Israelis, Chilonim, and religious Zionists that they go to battle and the Haredim don't go. So maybe David, maybe Uriah is standing there having additional contempt. The king leads the people in battle, and this guy doesn't go to battle. He's sleeping at home. And then when he comes back, and on top of it, he pulls me away from the battle, and he pulls me away from the battle to go sleep with my wife. All the contempt I have for him already, this is over the top. So maybe that's where that psychology is coming from. And that's where we left off. We have we've seen David talking with God, God telling him he sinned terribly, David saying, I don't know what to do about it, and thank you for being here. We continue. The Gemara says in Sanhedrin 107b, Kuv Zayin Amud Bet, Gechazi Dichtiv, I'm so a little ahead. Obviously, I was reviewing, and Darash Rabbi Dostai Demin Beirei, a rabbi in the Talmud, taught, Rabbi Dostai, from the town or city of Beirei. He taught Lama David Dome. What is David? How may we compare David? The Socher Kuti. He's like a guy, like a Kuthian merchant, for our purposes, like a guy like an Arab at the Shuk in the old town in Yerushalayim. In eastern Yerushalayim, as you're going to the Kotel, you go through the Shuk, the Arab Shuk. And what happens when you try to buy something from the Arab? He starts negotiating. In fact, it's universally known, you never pay the price that the Arab asks for without quibbling. They almost get insulted if you pay the price they quote. They want to quibble. And you negotiate and you quibble, and what about this? And how about if I give you 10? Well, no, it's got to be 15. Well, what about 11? All right, I'll go to 14. What about 12? I'll go. You know what I'm talking about. So Rav Dostai is saying David did that with God. He started negotiating like with an Arab at the Shuk. David, Lifnei Kadosh Baruch Hu. David said to God, the Holy One, blessed be He. HaKadosh Baruch Hu, HaKadosh, the Holy, Baruch, blessed, who, He. A Holy One, blessed be He, Kadosh Baruch Hu. He said to the Kadosh Baruch Hu, Ribono Shel Olam, Master of the universe. Shkiot mi avin. Let's look, where is that? That's Psalm 19. Okay, and here we go. He said in Psalm 19, Shkiot mi avin, minis tarot nakeni. God, who can be aware of all his sins or his errors? Shkia is an error. Clean me of unperceived guilt. In other words, if I've done a sin, or if I've done sins in my life that I'm not aware of, or that I've nistarot, they're hidden. If I've done sin, a person does a sin, often you hold up a bank, you know you're doing a sin. A person does a sin, sometimes insults someone, not realizing he did so. Mocks someone, makes a small joke of his name, doesn't think of it, but actually he crushed the other person because the person took it. He got the wrong guy, deeply sensitive. He's not aware he committed a sin. So he says, who will know? Who can understand all of his errors? Minas tarot nakeni, God, please, I don't even know how to do repentance on that, atonement. Please atone, please forgive me. Gam mizedim. Okay, so let's say God says, okay, I'll do that. I'll forgive your knowing errors. Will you forgive my unknown errors? I'll forgive your unknown errors. Gam mizedim chasoch avdecha. Al yimshalu bi. Furthermore, please make it that, let's say, strong sins and evil people will not execute punishment on me for sins. Don't let them have power over me. Imagine God says, all right, I'll do that also. Viniketi mi pesha rav, would you also please, even when I've done a gigantic, humongous sin, will you forgive me for that also? And God says, all right, I'll forgive you for that too. So here's the Gemara, what he's saying. He's saying that David talked to God like he was a shuk. Shkiot mi avin, where he says, who will be aware? What if I don't know my errors? Amarle, God said, Shviki lach, I forgive you. Uministarot nakeni, and would you also forgive me for unknown sins, secret sins? Shviki lach, God says, I'll forgive you for that too. Gam misedim chasol chavdecha. Also, what about, will you, for example, protect me from the evil, from evil people who, an intentional shviki lach, I'll forgive you for that. Al yimshalu vi azetam delolish to ubi rabbanan shviki lach. He says, will you forgive me even for the kinds of sins I don't want people to talk about? The rabbis should not talk about me. They should not cite me. The rabbanan should not use me as an example in a study hall of an example of a shviki lach. You're forgiven for all of that. David was very successful negotiating. And then he says, Viniketi mi pesharav, shel lo yikatev sirchoni. All right, I'll just go down one more. You've forgiven me for major sins, secret sins. The rabbis won't talk about it in their study classes. Can you utterly clean me in the sense of 1904, I took it down, in the sense of shelo yikatev sirchoni, that what I just did with Bat Sheva and Uriah, the book has not yet been written. Shmuel Bet has not yet been written. Can you make it? Can I beg of you that it never be written in the book? When they write a history of this time, can you niketi shelo yikatev sirchoni, that it will not be written? It'll be forgotten. As people read the annals of David HaMelech, no one will know about it because it won't appear. Omar lo I efshar. God said, that I cannot do. I, not, efshar, possible. That is impossible. I cannot do that for you. Uma yut. Here's what you need to understand. God says. Take that off the screen. Let's refresh our memories. In the book of Bereshit, Genesis, chapter 17, Parak Yud Zayin, God renamed Sarah. Originally, there were Avram, not Avraham, Abram, not Abraham, and Sarai, not Sarah, Sarah. And God said of Abram, I'm renaming you Abraham. We're not going to go into why. So Avram became Avraham. Later on, he renamed Sarai, Sarah. Vayomer Elokim and Avraham, God said to Abraham, Sarai Ishtecha, your wife Sarai, Lo tikra et shma Sarai, her name no longer shall be Sarai, ki im Sarah. You shall not call her Sarai, but Sarah. All right. File that in your mind a second. Sarah becomes Sarai becomes Sarah. There is a great, this is Midrash. Obviously, letters in an alphabet don't talk. They don't have character, personality, bodily functions. But the Midrash has many Midrashim, legends about the letters of Hebrew. One legend is that the letter Yud protested to God. How could you, what did I do wrong? It was such an honor to me that you attached my letter to the name of the first mother of the Jewish people. You gave Sin that honor, Resh that honor, and Yud that honor. And in changing her name, Sin and Resh retained their place, and you changed Yud to Hey. You took away my honor. And Yud would not leave God alone. For years and decades, even centuries, the Midrash is that Yud would not leave God alone. You still haven't answered me, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Why did you take me away from her name? I want justice. You're the God of justice. And according to the Midrash, God said, all right, you're right. Okay. And so what God did was he renamed the leader of the tribe of Ephraim, and he renamed him, let's see where it is. He took the leader, there we go. There we go. Ephraim was headed by Hosea bin Nun. Hosea, the son of Nun. His name skipped over it. So after God names all the tribal leaders, including the leader of Ephraim is Hosea, and meanwhile in the back of the room, Yud is still yelling and protesting for several hundred years ago that he was taken off Sarai. And according to the Midrash, Hosea, these are the names of the spies whom Moshe sent to spy out the land of Israel. And you know how that story ended up. We don't have time to talk about it now. Vayikra Moshe le Hoshea, and Moshe renamed Hosea. He called Hosea Yehoshua. He changed his name from Hosea to Joshua. That's why we sing Joshua fought the battle of Jericho, and we don't sing Hosea fought the battle of Jericho, because Hosea was changed to Joshua. Let's look. The letters Hey and Vav, Shin and Ayin. The only change in the name is a Yud was added. According to the Midrash, God said to Yud, all right, you're back in the book, associated, attached to the name of the person who will lead the Jews into the land of Israel. Good? All right, I'll take it. So, back to this Gemara, David says, can you please, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, you have agreed to 4 things I've asked you serially in my negotiating. One last thing. Can you agree that what happened with Bat Sheva, with Uriah, will not be written in the book? Omar lo, Yefshar. God said, impossible. Uma Yud, shenatalti misarai omed v'tzoleach kama shanim. Look at the letter Yud. I took it away from Sarai, and it stood and screamed. How many years? That so to speak, that you had no right to take me out of the book. Ad Shaboya Hoshua Vosafti lo, until finally Hosea came, and I added the Yud to him to make him Yoshush Namar, as the pasuk I just read you, Vayikra Moshe Hosea ben Nun Yoshua. Kol haparasha kula kol haparasha kula. So David, just as I tried to take Yud out of the book, and he wouldn't let me, it wouldn't let me, and it was right. And I put him back in the book. Al achat kama v'kama, in the same way, this incident cannot be taken out of the forthcoming book. It must be included in the book. It will be recorded for all history, and they'll be learning about it in Irvine, California, and on Zoom in the year 2025. So David says, well, at least am I forgiven? V'niketi mi pesharav. So David said, Master of the universe, can you, if it's going to be recorded, can you at least forgive me? Grant me a pardon. See how everything ties in with current events. Can you grant me a pardon? That it will be recorded that I sinned. Like, you ever ask yourself, and again, I'm not getting into the politics of it, what is the meaning of a political pardon nowadays? So let's say, and again, I'm not getting into politics of it, because you'd be sure, like Trump will be pardoning a whole bunch of people too. Probably before next week's class, or just about. What's a pardon? We all know the guy committed the crime anyway. I'm not talking about Trump or Hunter Biden or any of them. Whoever gets pardoned. When a guy gets pardoned, everybody knows 99%, especially the political ones, and everybody knows which are the political ones. So what's the big thing? So again, I'm not getting into Hunter Biden in terms of anything about him. I'm just making this point, and I'm leaving him alone. If you believe, let's put it this way, if you believe Hunter Biden is a crook, if you don't believe, good for you. If you believe Hunter Biden's a crook, then what's the difference if he got a pardon? You still believe he's a crook. So what does it matter? Why is everybody going, why are all the anti-Biden people so upset that he got pardoned? Because even though the public knows what it knows, a pardon makes official for all time to come, it was not a sin. It just does. Yeah, but we know it doesn't matter. It didn't. You could probably be sued for defamation if you call the guy a crook after he's been pardoned. I don't want to get into that too much, but I wouldn't be surprised if you were to call Hunter Biden a XYZ. Maybe he could sue for defamation. He's no longer a crook. End of story. So in the same way, David HaMelech is saying, can you pardon me? Literally, not just commute the sentence, but pardon me. That people will read what they will read, but they will read that God pardoned him. So, and indeed, we're going to find, obviously, there's some kind of pardon ultimately, because David is the progenitor of the Mashiach, the Messiah. So clearly, a pardon is coming, but so he's negotiating. Can you forgive me for that, the entirety of that sin? Kulo. Kivar atid. So God said, Amar. God says, here, let me put it this way. I am not presently going to publicly pardon you. No. Kivar atid. Shlomo bincha lomar b'chachmato hayafte ish b'cheko. You're going to have a son. He's going to be named Solomon, Shlomo. He's going to be very wise. And in his wisdom, chachmato hachachma shalo, in his wisdom, he's going to say, can a person hold fire in his lap, uvagadav lo tisarafna, and his garment won't get singed? Im yahalech ish al hagechalim, if a man walks on coals, v'raglav lo tikavena, will his feet not get burned? Cain haba al eshet reyehu. Similarly, if a man has physical intimacy with the wife of his neighbor, lo yinakeh, what do you think? I'm just going to go around saying, okay, forgiven. And yes, of course, it's not technically because of the divorce document. We know that, but still, kol hanogea b'Hashem amarle kol hachinach nikrad hahugafra. So David said, this is just going to overwhelm me. Nitrad, tirda, it's going to overwhelm me with burden and with, I can't handle this. I guess I can handle it, but it's going to, God says, all right, you'll have to earn a pardon. I will not absolutely say no. You'll have to earn it. Kabel alecha yisurin. You will have to accept upon yourself persecution, travails, horrible stuff that I'm going to, a horrible punishment, really bad punishment. Are you prepared for that? Kibel alav. David accepted that. Go ahead. He says, I'll accept punishment. I want to clear my soul. I want to clear my name. More than clearing his name, though that's very important. He doesn't want the rabbis to talk about it. He doesn't want history to talk about it, but he wants to clear his soul. He wants a place in the world to come, don't we all? It's really something we all need to think about. I know I do. That if this is what David goes through, and David HaMelech, it bears on my mind. I recommend it should bear on every Jew's mind, on every person's mind, in order to be worthy to go in the world to come, what people call heaven, paradise, olam haba. You have to clean your soul, Yom Kippur, and you have to be mindful of, you can't just start and decide you've got a clean slate. Yom Kippur is very important and something we have to constantly work at, all of us. Anyway, back to this. So David says, I will accept Yisurin, persecutions from you, God. Amarav Yehuda Amarav. So Rabbi Yehuda heard a teaching of what David did. The great rabbi, who's known as Rav, who's the chief rabbi of the Babylonian Jewish community of Neherda, taught, and Rabbi Yehuda learned from him. Shishoch Harashim Nitztara David. For 6 months, as a result, David was a leper, was smitten with leprosy. V'nistalka hemenu Shechina. And Shechina, the Shekhinah, the omnipresent God, departed from him, had no contact, communication with David for those 6 months of his leprosy. Upershu mimenu Sanhedrin. And the great judges of the Sanhedrin, of the high court, separated away from him. He became an isolated leper for 6 months. So now the Gemara continues. Where do you come up with that? Well, that's interesting, and sure, that sounds like a pretty strong yisur, travail, for an atonement for what he did. But where did you come up with that? For 6 months, I'll just make a quick adjustment here. The idea that for 6 months, there we go. The idea that for 6 months he's going to be a leper and everybody pulled away from him. So let's see. The Gemara tells us, taught through Rav Yehuda, as follows: Dichtiv techateni be'ezov v'et techabseni umisheleg albin. So first of all, in Tehillim 51, verse 9, it says, let's see if I can find this. Tehillim 51, verse 9. He says, purge me with hyssop till I am pure. Techateni be'ezov ve'et wash me till I am whiter than snow. So whiter, on the one hand, that's an image in sin. To be red as crimson is deep sin, and to be purified white as snow. And they learn from his begging and the purification from tzara'at, from biblical leprosy, not medical leprosy of our day, but biblical leprosy, which was different from contemporary leprosy of the modern era. You needed hyssop and other processes. We won't go into that now. But from the verse in Psalm 51:9, Tehillim Nun Aleph Pasuk Tet, they learn out, that's where we get the idea that he was leprosized, that he was made a leper. How do we know, furthermore, that Nistalka Hemenu Shechina? How do we know that the Shechina, that God's omnipresence, departed from David? Dichtiv Hashiva li sason yeshecha v'ruach nediva tismecheni, where David says again in that same psalm, please, Hashiva, return to me, sason yeshecha, the joy, the happiness of your salvation, v'ruach nediva, and the spirit of your kindness. Please give that back to me. Again, the same chapter, 51, in Pasuk Yudalid, David continues in chapter 51, Perek Nun Aleph, Hashiva li sason zishecha v'ruach nediva tismecheni. Let me again rejoice in your salvation, in having you close to me. 6 months later, let a vigorous spirit sustain me. Let a better translation, let a loving spirit, a kind. Nediva is not vigorous. Nediva would be kind and loving. Let a kind, loving spirit support me. Smicha is when, for example, when a rabbi gets smicha, it's because technically it's not done this way nowadays, but like a rabbi who ordains, puts his hands on the head of the rabbi he's ordaining. He gives smicha, and thereby symbolically says that I'll be a sustainer of you, a mentor and such. So that's how we know that he apparently was smitten with leprosy, because he's asking God at some later point to cleanse him with hyssop and to make him white as snow. That's how we know that God stepped aside from him, abandoned him, because he's begging God to return to him the joy of his being together. And finally, the Gemara says, and how do you know this was for 6 months? Shisha chadashim inal and dechtiv vayamim asher malach David al Yisrael arba'im shana. It says, they learn out that David was smitten 6 months with leprosy, because the Bible says, that Tanakh says, he ruled for 40 years. We've all learned this, but we've never learned it this way. And no one else learns of this. No one else learns this. But the Gemara learns it. But it doesn't get taught because people only read the surface of the text without plumbing deep into the text. So he served as king 40 years, he reigned. Hevron malach sheva shanim, in Hebron, in Hevron, the city of our fathers, where Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, and Rivka, and Sarah, Rivka, and Leah are laid to rest in Morred Machpelah. Hevron malach sheva shanim. First, he ruled for 7 years in Hevron. That was while Ishbosheth, the sole surviving son of Saul, was still reigning in the part of Benjamin, up just in the northern part, just over the northern border, in Jerusalem. So first David ruled for 7 years, and then when Ishbosheth was assassinated, as we learned, first his chief of staff Abner was ambushed and killed in a way that Yoav had no right to do, and himself will be punished for at a later time. And then with the chief of staff dead, and Ishbosheth no longer was supported and protected, and he was assassinated. And then David moved his kingdom to Jerusalem from Hevron. Like in the United States, the first capital of the United States, I think, was briefly New York. Then, of course, it became Philadelphia. And if you ever see the musical 1776, or just learn American history. And then from Philadelphia, they moved to what became Washington, D.C. So capitals move. Israel, capital Tel Aviv, is now Jerusalem. So in Hevron, 7 years, Yerushalayim malach shloshim shalosh shanim. And then he reigned 33 years in Jerusalem. Thus, he reigned 40 years. And that's what it says. But wait a second. It says somewhere else, Uchtiv b'Hevron malach Yehuda sheva shanim v'shisha chadashim. Somewhere else in the Tanakh, it says, no, he did not reign 33 years, 7 years in Hevron. He reigned 7 years, 6 months in Hevron. V'hani shisha chadashim lo kachashiv shma min hanistar. So which is it? Did he reign 40 years, 33 plus 7? Or did he reign 40 years, 6 months, 33.6 plus 7? So the Gemara answers, he reigned 40 years, and amid those 6 months, 6 months he was there, but did not reign. What was he doing? Why didn't he reign? Because he was stricken with tzara'at. So let's take a look at the verses that we just quoted. In 1 Kings, Melachim Aleph, we haven't learned that yet, Perek Bet, second chapter. By now, David has just died. Vayishkav, it's coming up. We're way from there yet. But in 1 Kings chapter 2, Vayishkav David imavotav yikaver be'er David, David dies on his deathbed and is buried in the city of David. And it says, Pasuk Yud, The length of David's reign over Israel was 40 years. He reigned 7 years at Hevron and reigned 33 years in Yerushalayim. Hayamim Hashem malach David al Yisrael arbim shana. B'Hevron malach sheva shanim u'Yerushalayim malach 33 shanim. Okay, nice, simple. What's the problem? Problem is we already learned a few chapters ago. Perhaps we don't remember it freshly. And that's why I always take out a little time, not merely to quote you from a Gemara, but I like to go back to the text. That's how I came to learn stuff well, by constantly going back and looking at it and remembering it. But of course, because of time, we have to do it quickly. 2 Samuel, Shmuel Bet, which is what we're learning now, chapter 5, Parak 8. We're now in chapter 12. We learned in chapter 5, Ben Shloshim Shana David Malacho. David was 30 years old when he ascended as king, Arba'im Shana Malach, and he ruled 40 years. No, what's the difference? B'Hevron Malach al Yehuda Sheva Shanim V'Shisha Chadashim. In Hebron, he ruled, this is while Ishbosheth still was alive, so he ruled only under the kingdom of Judea, because Ishbosheth was king over the other 11 tribes. 7 years, V'Shisha Chadashim, in 6 months. U'Yerushalayim Malach Shloshim V'Shalosh Shana Al Kol Yisrael V'Yehuda. And then he went to Jerusalem, where he ruled 33 years on all of Israel, as well as Judea. Aha. So what's with the 6 months? Is it a typo? Is it a mistake? No. He was between Hevron and Yerushalayim. He was there 40 years and 6 months. He ruled for 40 years. And for 6 months, he was down with leprosy. And that's how we know. Okay. And what was the leprosy about? It was part of God's punishment for what he did with Bat Sheva and with Uriah, albeit that these were technically legal. Now look, if he had illegally done some of these things, he would have been perhaps susceptible to a death penalty. He could have been possibly held to that. Certainly if it were real adultery, but it wasn't, again, because she'd been in a mikveh and she'd been divorced. But for adultery, it would be capital punishment. The king can have anybody killed, so that he wouldn't be punished. And there were other forms of punishment. Instead, it's kind of an uncertain punishment. Everybody would have known the king has leprosy, but no one really knows what to make of it. Again, I'm not getting into politics. I just always use contemporary examples. Trump got hit with COVID while he was president. Was that a punishment from God because of some sin? Maybe. Maybe not. A lot of people got COVID. Were they all getting punished for sin? Who knows? But we don't know. Biden clearly is losing his capacity. That's not a political thing. The whole world knows it. Everyone knows it. Is that a sin? Is that a punishment? Did he do some sin in politics for which God decided not to let him have a peaceful 4-year presidency, but to start making him leaving him more incapacitated? I don't know. A lot of people that age, God forbid, run into that. So we don't know. So the idea is that, but it might be a punishment, but we don't know. So it might be that David, in getting stricken with leprosy, was being punished in a public way that people would, but they don't know. Who knows why? Maybe he came into contact with someone who's a leper. Maybe it is a punishment for something else. But this was David said to God, all right, I will assume upon myself Yisurin. I'm willing to accept travails and severe punishment in order to expiate my soul from the sin of Bat Sheva and Uriah. So now, Amar Lefanav Ribono Shel Olam. So David further said, Master of the universe, Machol li al oto avon. So please forgive me now. Paid my dues. Machul lach. God said, you now are forgiven you. There are those who have asked and wondered in previous classes, and certainly those who don't study Tanakh the way we do, ask and wonder without even coming to ever exploring and finding an answer. How could it be that David, who had committed this wrong, would end up being the progenitor of Mashiach, of Messiah? That we sing David Melech Yisrael Chai V'Kayam. That we sing about the glory of David, that he's the greatest king we ever had. What about the Bat Sheva and Uriah? And you with me today have learned more deeply that he went through penance. He accepted upon himself, he didn't know it would be leprosy, but he accepted effectively leprosy. Went through humiliation and shame, willingly and knowingly, not that he simply caught an illness. And his entire life he spent, we'll be learning in the future as well, he spent his entire life, even after being forgiven and told you're forgiven, spent his entire life atoning for that. And he's going to be punished in more ways yet. These are just, leprosy is just the beginning. What he's going to go through, no one would want to go through. And this is just the beginning. He's just going through leprosy. He's going to go through more horrible things. And beyond all that, he's going to wait until the day he dies. He's going to be asking God to forgive him. And that is why David is the greatest king in the history of the Jewish people. Because kings don't do that. You can be sure, whatever your politics, Biden is not going around apologizing for all the things he's done wrong. And this is not political, because Trump does not go around apologizing for the things. I've never heard Trump apologize. If I'm wrong, I apologize to Trump. I've never heard him apologize for anything in the first term. I don't expect it from the second term. Since we're talking 2 Trump terms and 1 Biden term, let's even it out. I never heard an apology from Obama. If you want your doctor, you can keep your doctor. You want this, you'll keep this. Never heard an apology. These people don't apologize, all of them. John Kennedy didn't apologize. Maybe Lincoln I don't know if Lincoln apologized. Most people who make it to the top, they don't. I don't have to apologize. And so they don't. Lyndon Johnson, how much did he apologize for what he did in Vietnam? And we go on and on. Even Nixon. Nixon never apologized for what he did. He resigned and he was heartbroken. He didn't, I mean, an apology is, I did the following thing wrong. I accept that I was a wrongdoer. He left contending he's not worthy of being thrown out, and so on and so forth. Even Agnew, nolo contender, he didn't admit he did it. He pleaded, I don't have anything to say. So that's what makes David HaMelech so great, because he's a king who admitted he did wrong for something that technically wasn't even illegal, and he accepted upon himself the worst imaginable punishments. We haven't even gotten to it yet. We just got to leprosy. So he says to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, now that I've accepted upon myself horrible punishments, and you've begun implementing them, now can you make some public declaration that my soul is clear? Se'imi ot l'tova. Can you finally give me a sign that it's all going to be forgiven? This is Tehillim 86. Let's find it. Okay. This is David HaMelech in Parak Pei Vav, Pasuk Yud Zayin. Says, turn to me and have mercy on me. Grant your strength to your servant. Deliver the son of your maidservant. Show me a sign of your favor, that my enemies may see and be frustrated, because you, O Lord, have given me aid and comfort. The Gemara learns from that David's saying, please, my enemies already are whispering, and they're talking, and it has become known, and the Sanhedrin pulled away from me. With the leprosy and everything, it's destroyed me in a way, my reputation. Please, Omar le b'chayecha eini modia. God said, in your lifetime, I will not modia, like yodea, to know. I will not make known to the general public that you are 100% forgiven and that your soul is pure. Not in your lifetime. Aval ani modia b'chayei Shlomo bincha. But I will make it known for all Jewish history, to all Jews now, and to all Jewish history, in the lifetime of your son Solomon. B'sha'ah shebana Shlomo et Beit HaMikdash, We're wrapping up with the Gemara. We have 2 more paragraphs that take maybe 5 minutes or 7 minutes. Do it quickly. When Shlomo built the Beit HaMikdash, b'sha'ah shebana Shlomo at Beit HaMikdash, bikesh l'hachnis Aron leveit kodshei hakodeshim. He wanted to bring the Holy Ark, like Indiana Jones and the search for the Ark. That's the Ark. That's nonsense, of course, but the Holy Ark, we learn about it in the Torah. Aaron Brit Hashem had the 10 Commandments in it, had the staff of Aharon that sprouted almonds, had a piece of man. The Holy Ark goes into the Kodesh HaKodeshim. So Shlomo had just built a Beit HaMikdash, and he's furnishing it with all the accessories that the Torah in the book of Exodus, Sefer Shmot, like in Teruma and Vayakhel, command. And so he brings the ark. Dovku sha'arim zabaza. The gates of the temple that he built wouldn't open. He couldn't get the gates to open to bring in the ark. Omar esrim v'arba'a rananot. He then recited 24 prayers, like the equivalent of Psalms, not Tehillim, but like Psalms. He sang 24 prayers to God. V'lo na'ana, and God did not answer his prayers. Omar Su'usha, some of you will recognize these psukim here from from like Friday night davening and Shabbos morning when we bring the Torah around on days that are not, like on Yom Tov when it's not Shabbat, and on like the night of Erev Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. Su'usha arim roshechem v'nasu pitchei olam v'yamelech kavod. Gates, open your heads. What does that mean? A gate should open its head. He recited Psalms that his father David recited. Gates, open up. Open up. Pitchei olam, opening to the world. V'yavo melech hakavod, so that the king of glory, through his holy ark, can come in. Miza melech hakavod, Hashem Yizuz v'gibor, Hashem gibor melchama. Who is the God of glory? The God of strength, the God of power, the God of war. And there's Shlomo reciting these verses, and the doors won't open. And he can't get God for some mysterious reason. God let him build the Beit HaMikdash. God had prophesied. We've learned it so many times that God had prophesied through the prophet Natan to David that it would be Shlomo who would build the Beit HaMikdash by God's desire and command. So what does this mean that it won't open now? Everything else is done. Just got to open the door. Kevin Shamar, he said one more thing. He spoke, cited in 2 Chronicles 6. Let's find it real quick. Okay. He says in Divrei Yamim 2 Chronicles chapter 6, verse 42, he says, advance, O Lord God, to your resting place, you and your mighty ark. Your priests, O Lord God, are clothed in triumph. Your loyal ones will rejoice in your goodness. Please let the ark through. Here we go. O Lord God, do not reject your anointed one. Remember the loyalty of your servant David. Hashem Elokim al tashev b'nei Meshichecha, zachra lechastei David avdecha. What happens? As he finishes, when Solomon finished that prayer, fire descended from heaven and consumed the burnt offering and the sacrifices, and the glory of God filled the entire house, the Beit HaMikdash. What does it say here in the Gemara as we wrap that up? Once he said, O Lord, turn not away from the face of your anointed. Remember the good deeds of David, your servant. He was immediately answered, and the gates opened. At that moment, all the faces of David's enemies turned dark, like the charred bottom of a pot. And all the Jewish people knew that the Holy One, blessed be he, had forgiven David for that sin. So it was only by David's merit that Shlomo's prayer was answered, and that the ark was opened, and that the gates were opened for the ark to come in. And it is through this and these pasukim that I brought you today that we learned many things. We've learned it all. Just to wrap it up, 1, 2, 3. Number one, that the sin, despite being legal and everything he did, was one of the most horrific sins, especially for him. Number two, his punishment was so severe that the entire nation found out about it. Number three, it was so severe that in order for him to gain expiation and atonement, he had to willingly say to God, he's willing to shoulder some of the most horrible punishments imaginable. He was smitten with leprosy. He was knocked out for 6 months from his royal duties. God stepped aside from him, and he finally begged God, please, can I at least know in my lifetime that I've been forgiven? God says, you have been forgiven. He says, finally, can you make that known to everyone else? And God says, I will not do that in your lifetime, but when your son Solomon Shlomo comes, it will become known to everyone that I have forgiven you. That happens when Shlomo tries to open the doors of the Beit HaMikdash to bring in the ark. And no matter what he prays, no matter what he invokes, the doors don't open. And then he says, will you open the doors in the merit of David, your anointed? And the doors open. And the entire nation knows, as we do tonight, having learned it, that David was forgiven and the ark was allowed in. And in a way, it even means that David had a part in building the Beit HaMikdash after all. Thank you so much for being here tonight. And I'm glad we're back in business. Have a wonderful night and see many of you Thursday. Bye-bye.